Thank you very much. We're going to get started so we don't go on too long in the afternoon. Thank you very much for coming today for this. It's a little irregular scheduling of the Water Climate Briefing Series, but we really wanted to get this topic in, and we thank Dave White, DCDC, for letting us fit it into this space. My name is Hallie Aiken. I'm on the faculty of the School of Sustainability. And together with my colleagues, Rimjan Agarwal, who you'll hear from in a minute, and Abby York, who is in the back, and Summer Waters, who's right here, we have been working with the community, with experts in Canal, Maricopa, Phoenix metropolitan area on issues of agriculture and agricultural change for some time. And this is a collaboration between ASU, the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension, which Summer Waters represents here, and it's work that's funded by the Decision Center for the Desert City, as well as the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We're very pleased today to talk about the dynamics of energy and water in central Arizona agriculture, and we're particularly interested in unpacking some of the complexities of the agriculture sector in response to uncertainty in energy and water prices and policy. We have a great panel today. Brian Betcher, who is the general manager for the Maricopa Irrigation and Drainage District, Ed Garrick, who is the general manager of the Buckeye Water Conservation and Drainage District, Natosha Nakai, who is from the Central Arizona Project, Ron Rayner, who is from Tumbling Tea Ranches, and Karen Smith, who is a fellow at the Grand Canyon Institute. And they'll be coming up here in just a minute. Before we get started, I just wanted to provide a little bit of contextual information, because I know we tend to have a very diverse audience, just so we're all on kind of similar footing as we begin today's discussion. So first, I thought I would just give you just one of our piece from our research that we've been doing. We conducted a research survey this summer with area growers, and one of the questions that we asked growers was, what is one of the major concerns? What are the things that really concern you and affect your viability over the next 10 years or so? And one of the things that we found from that survey was that surface water availability was a primary concern for area growers. You can find the full results of that survey. There's a website down here. Come see me afterwards, and I can give you access to that information. A follow-up meeting with some of those growers, as well as a broader group of stakeholders, including many of the panelists that are going to be speaking today, revealed that an additional source of uncertainty was energy prices and energy policy, and how that affects farm decisions, particularly related to water. So today we're trying to get some insights from the agriculture sector perspective on how that affects agriculture decision making. We're not intending this discussion today to be kind of a forum for discussing energy regulation per se for its own sake. We're really interested in illuminating what this all means for agriculture and agriculture decisions. So just a little bit of background for those of you who may be unfamiliar with how water is used and allocated in agriculture here. About 49% of the water that's used to irrigate agriculture in central Arizona comes from the Central Arizona Project, from the Colorado River. And pumping that water from the Colorado down into central Arizona is a fairly energy-intensive activity. And the majority of the energy that is used to move that water comes from the Navajo generating station. The energy prices in recent years have been increasing, and right now the Navajo generating station is facing some regulations that may increase the cost of energy even further. And this is all going to have implications for the cost of water, in particular tap water, and what this means for agriculture is what we're going to be talking about today. Of course, agriculture also relies on groundwater, and groundwater in general is less energy intensive per acre foot of water pumped than tap water. However, it's important to recognize that the policy over the last decades or so has been to move agriculture off of groundwater to kind of focus on surface water flows and in part to make that groundwater available further into the future and allow urban growth to continue. So there has been this, in order to achieve safe yield, is to rely more on surface water flows. Another source of uncertainty that affects the central Arizona region is the flow of the Colorado River itself. And so in the last decade or so, there's been a number of studies from different sources that have thrown into question some of the assumptions about the reliability of that flow into the future. And this is a graphic from a recent Bureau of Reclamation report on the Colorado River Basin, which suggests that into the future, projected water demand is going to exceed supply. And this is going to affect how water is allocated, create potentially some need to reallocate resources, and to think differently about the use of the Colorado River among the various stakeholders who rely on it. Agriculture itself is going to, in central Arizona, will be differently affected by this, depending on not only what crops are grown, but what source of water agriculture receives and uses. So one of the things that is of note in the farm sector is that agriculture prices, particularly cotton and alfalfa prices, have been on the upswing. And so this has actually been quite good for the farm sector. It has increased viability and vitality in the sector. And these are, just so you know, the primary crops in this area are cotton and alfalfa, and a variety of other grains that have also grown. The way that energy and water prices will impact agriculture will vary tremendously, or maybe not tremendously, we'll get a feel for that soon, but will vary across central Arizona depending on the composition, the portfolio of water resources in each irrigation district. And here we just have a sample of irrigation districts and in general terms where their water is coming from. And you can see that cap water in blue, groundwater in red, other sources, other surface sources are effluent in green, that it varies across central Arizona. So we can imagine that given the variability in water and energy prices, kind of what that means in terms of the source, the impact is also going to vary across the region as well. And so with that, I think I'll conclude with just that. I hope that gave just some general introduction so you have a kind of a basic understanding. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Rimjan Agarwal, who will be just moderating today's discussion. And so maybe if the panelists would want to kind of come up to the chairs up here. And I'll turn it over to Rimjan, who will introduce the questions for today.
Yeah, so we'll leave that chair empty out there. So once again, Heidi, thanks very much. And we are very fortunate to have a distinguished panel here. All these people, as you heard, they represent very different positions and perspectives within the agricultural and the water and the energy sector. But we have limited time, right? So my job is to keep track of time. So I thought it would be good to talk a little bit about how we are structuring this panel discussion. We have these three, what we would call overarching questions. And so what I thought was that we have about a little more than an hour to go over these. So we will have we'll have three blocks to address these three questions. And I'll begin by addressing specific questions to specific people, depending on how we understand what their expertise and position is. And then we'll allow more sort of crosstalk, and we allow the panelists to respond to each other's positions, and then turn the discussion over to the audience. Okay, so we'll do that for each of these blocks. And hopefully we will have time at the end to take more questions that tie things together and any loose ends that may have been left. So we'll begin with the first question, and the way we thought we would approach it is that I'll first ask Katasha, perhaps you to talk a little bit about, help us understand what's going on with energy prices. What have been the trends with respect to the prices, the allocation, the distribution, and how that is expected to change?
Well, as many in the audience probably know, energy prices are constantly fluctuating and changing. Can't hear me in the back. Energy prices are constantly changing. And currently, the natural gas market is sort of setting the tone for where the energy prices are. And they're quite low in the natural gas market right now. But what that does to CAP power, in some ways, it has an inverse effect because of the power that we're producing at Navajo Generating Station. The CAP, there are multiple owners of the Navajo Generating Station. 90% of our power or more comes from Navajo Generating Station. And we are Arizona's largest power consumer. A lot of people don't know that. And one of the things that happens is that the Bureau of Reclamation owns the largest share of the Navajo Generating Station, and it makes that power available to the Central Arizona Project. The Central Arizona Project takes what it needs at cost to run its pumps, and then it sells anything that it doesn't need into the open energy markets. But because the market is so low right now, we're not able to do the kinds of shaping and displacement that we would normally like to see happen in those markets. We don't have that ability. So there's no real good way to subsidize, if you will, some of our energy prices. So those get passed along in our rates. The other interesting thing that happens with Navajo Generating Station is it's an aging plant. There are things that have to be done to maintain the plant. There's also a regulatory component of things that are hitting the plant all at once. That we know, I think many of you probably have heard the issues surrounding bark, which is the big issue facing us right now. We also have NEPA issues associated with it because it's on federal land. There's potential MATS and mercury rules associated. All these sorts of regulatory things that are coming down the pipe. Issues surrounding cap and trade, if that ever gets off the ground at Navajo.
Could you just tell the audience about what the BART is, without everyone being familiar with it?
BART stands for Best Available Retrofit Technology. It's under the Clean Air Act, and it requires that the Environmental Protection Agency look at what is the best available retrofit technology to achieve the best visibility for Class 1 areas. There are about 11 of them in and around the Navajo Generating Station because of where it's situated, including the Grand Canyon, various parks, recreation areas, and those types of things. So the EPA in 2009 announced that it was planning to look at BART requirements for NGS, and its suggestion at that point was that it would look at something called SCR technology, selective catalytic reduction. And at that point, it became clear that our rates would be dramatically affected if something like this were to happen. The plant operator is the Salt River Project, SRP. They quickly came to the conclusion that most likely if you were required to put SCR technology on that plant, you would also have to have bag houses on that plant to manage particulate matter, which comes up underneath a different regulatory regime. And that would increase costs again. So for the last 2-3 years, we've been working with all of our stakeholders, including all of the ag interests, to make the case to EPA and to explain to people really what the impacts on water would be, because people were looking at this just specifically as a coal issue and a visibility issue. And one of the other sort of interesting things, which I don't think you really want to get into debates of NGS, relates to the visibility. Can it really be the best available retrofit technology if you can't even perceive the visibility changes with the human eye? There are other technologies that we have advocated be used, and the ag interests as well have advocated for that. But that's sort of the lay of the regulatory issues. Then we have issues associated just with operating the plant. New coal leases that have to be signed, new royalty payments, and when those come due, new water leases, all of those types of issues that are part of the plant's OM&R costs that get passed on to us through the energy rates and then subsequently passed on to the energy users. So that's.
So could
sort of
you
the way
give
we
us
do
some
this.
further idea on what rate increases are expected to be and what we?
Sure, this will be my grand contribution. If you want to talk specific dollars after this, I did want to note I dragged along our Assistant General Manager for Finance and Information Technologies, Ted Cook. He's in the audience with us today, and also one of our board members is Steve Carpenter, so I acknowledge him. But historically, our rates have been relatively predictable. Now, this is a preliminary chart. It's expected to change as we continue to move forward. But historically, the blue line represents our historic CAP rates. And generally speaking, they go up about 6% a year. Historically, that's been where we are. For 2013, 2018, you see the little dashed line starting to tick upward again on what we've adopted as our rates. The green line, I believe. The green line are our current cost estimates for where we really think we are. So even though we've set our rates, they're lower than what we actually think our costs are. So CAP is taking a hit on some of these rates currently. The red line, to get us back to the ag picture, represent what ag has been paying, historically where ag rates have been. We also have some incentives that we have provided to the ag sector to encourage them to use CAP water. Originally, when CAP water came online, it was the most expensive source of water, and people needed to be encouraged to use CAP water and to get off of the groundwater. And so now ag uses an interesting mix, and every farm is different, every agricultural interest is a little bit different. But we've helped through the ag incentive to balance their rates somewhat. Generally, that's been about a 2-cent difference. This year, our board voted and adopted that we're going to have to help have ag put a little more skin in the game, and now we're going to let that fluctuate about 3 cents more. And so already the costs are starting to increase for ag. If you look at the orange line or the yellow line, you'll see that the new NGS lease and coal contracts that are coming in are going to add yet another layer of expense to our rates. Again, ticking above the blue line and further from the red line. And then the purple dots represent what SCR, if it goes into effect in 2024 and 2026, which based on the EPA's just announced, I told you in 2009 they did the advance notice. They just in the last month issued their proposed rule that provides a series of alternatives. Looking at that and the timing factors, alternative 3 is the best case scenario at this point in our mind under their proposals. And so if you take those rates, you see sort of where the purple lines are shooting out. The gap is widening for ag, and that's not insignificant. And I think you'll hear a lot from the panel today to explain more about how they see that impacting the mix of water that they use, the lands that they farm, and what that means for the overall Arizona economic forecast.
So I know this is a lot of information. I want to make sure we have the audience with us. So what we'll do is I'll ask Karen to also respond to this from a policy and regulatory perspective. And when we hear the ag perspective, we have people from the irrigation district as well as a farmer. We'll return back to these rates, okay? And I'll make sure that everyone is with us, and we'll take questions from the audience. But in the interest of the time, let me ask Karen to sort of elaborate and extend on this.
Let me go up to about 30,000 feet with this, just on the CAP situation. And I think everyone recognizes that these changes, modifications to the plant, changes to the leases will increase costs, and that is going to make the water more expensive. If they're effective in 2024, I mean, one question we need to ask ourselves, where's the line? We talked about this earlier. Where's that line when available excess water for CAP begins to diminish so that this increased cost may be less of a factor than if it went into effect today. And that's really something I think Brian could speak to. The other thing that I just want to add is that while the CAP issue in Navajo Generating Station, that's front and center for a lot of people, there's also a lot of activity going on with the Arizona Power Authority, and a lot of our irrigation districts get their electricity for groundwater pumping from the Arizona Power Authority. It gets its power from Hoover, Parker, Davis, that system, and some as well from the Colorado River Storage Project from Glen Canyon Dam. Now that, the price of that electricity, it's about, I think Ed told me they pay about 4.5 cents for Arizona Power Authority, Hoover Power. It's about in that 4.5 to 10 cent range. So it's very manageable expense price-wise. I think the issue for Arizona Power Authority, they're in a reallocation process right now to go into effect in 2017. And so as part of that process, the Arizona Power Authority is taking power from existing customers to create a new pool of power for new customers, for people who have not been APA customers. And so that affects our irrigation electric districts who have been customers of Arizona Power Authority since it was formed, in the 30s. So I think APA, that Arizona Power Authority, is an issue for our farms as well. Finally, I would say that, most of our farms get mixes of power. It would be very unusual for somebody to just get Hoover A or just get Hoover B. So you get some Arizona Power Authority power, but you're mixing it with power from Salt River Project or from Arizona Public Service or from one other of our main utility electric providers. They all have special ag pumping rates. They're much, much lower than residential rates, just as an example, but even still, that they're not cheap. So for SRP, I think their ag pumping rate averages about 8 cents a kilowatt hour. I think APS's is more. It might be closer in the 15 to 16 cents a kilowatt hour rate. And so you gotta mix all that into a pot, Rim Jim, and stir it up. And that's gonna be your energy charge, which is, if you're a groundwater pumper, which many of our districts are, that is your single largest expense because the water's free. So it's just the energy to pump it. And we're in for sort of a confusing few years, I think, aren't we?
So on that note, can we turn to you, Ron? So what does
Sure.
all this mean in terms of our farming decisions?
Well, we had a little conversation earlier, and it's kind of interesting because on the little point, Brian was talking about the cost of things, and I said, well, the reason that people are not quite as concerned about energy in a CAP district is they're not the one writing the check for the energy. His district is writing the check for the energy because they're running most all the wells that they're buying the water from. So it makes the biggest impact on you when it hits you right here in the, I'm left-handed, that's my wallet, by the way. You have to understand there are a lot of people that in the ag business that know a lot about electricity. And over the last 25 years, I learned more than I ever wanted to know. I've been the board chairman of our electrical district for the last 25 years. And a lot of ag pumping is organized either under irrigation drainage districts or under electrical districts. And as Karen mentioned, that we do get about 20%, I think was the last check that we had of our power through the Arizona Power Authority. And sometimes that power is not the cheapest resource that we can get. We buy wholesale APS power, and wholesale is definitely different than a retail price. But then we buy it, their services in the separate components. We hire APS to read our meters. We hire them to send out our bills. We pay them to deliver the electricity over their wires. So we basically, the only assets our district even owns is a bunch of money in a bank account. That's the only asset that we have. And we have no employees. We have all contractor employees because a lot of these same contractor employees work for other districts as well. But we're a municipal entity. We have an elected board. We have taxing authority. If we wanted to be in the asset business and have our own wires, we could do that. But one of the things that we figured out in our district is our average depth of pumping, and that's one of the critical factors, is depth of pumping in addition to the price of the power that will determine whether it's feasible to continue pumping or not. But our average is somewhere around 1,000 kilowatt hours per acre foot. And so a penny change is $10 an acre foot. Did I just say that right and do it right? I'm not pretty sure that's what we figured out. So $10 an acre foot on a 1 cent change in the power cost. And if you're applying 4 acre feet, then you're looking at $40 an acre change swing in your crop budget. And that's one of the things that virtually every grower does at the beginning of every year, because prices change. Fertilizer prices have changed dramatically. And you try to figure out, once you put all these costs in, is there anything left for me? If there's nothing left for me, why am I doing this? Sometimes you'll roll the dice and you'll expect the price to go up or something, and maybe you'll do it once. But once you take a big loss, usually you won't do it again. It's kind of interesting. The University of Arizona, the Extension Service, used to produce area by area crop budgets, and when I say area by area, they're not county by county. They were by pumping area, so that each of these budgets reflected the cost of pumping or water delivery from a surface water group. But anyway, it really brought home, when you look through those budgets, just what the differences were. And if you've got any archives out at Extension Service, that would be interesting to pull up and have a look at. I just thought about that today when we were preparing for this, that, gosh, we used to have this information at our fingertips. And you can see the differences. We used to, and this is quite a few years ago, as a younger guy, I was out scratching, trying to find land to farm. They're still doing that today, I guess, but you had to have a number in mind that would be the aggregate cost of your rent and your water cost for the whole crop, whatever you were going to grow. And at that time it was around $350 an acre. I still remember that number. Well, if that land was in the Buckeye Irrigation District and their water cost was only $50, that means I could pay up to $300 for rent. Well, it was Harquahela Valley at the time, right after they started delivering CAP water, and back then the numbers kind of get away from me, but those numbers were as high as $50 to $70 an acre.
The highest one was $55. I think $55 an acre foot was the highest cost back then.
That was before we had the big upheaval and change, and so many districts either went broke or were very close to it, that actually went bankrupt. But anyway, when you use that number of $55 times like 5 acre feet, you're over 250 bucks or whatever, or $300. You're very close to. Maybe the rental value of that land then was only 25 bucks an acre. That's all you could pay in rent for that. And there were some areas I remember calculating at the time that they would have a negative rental value because the water cost was going to be more than the value of what you were going to
So bringing it up to the present, what would you say is happening now and into the future?
Well,
what are farmers thinking about? What are they?
Well, I'll tell you.
What's the talk around?
We're focusing very hard on that. One of the things that we just did a year ago in October, a group of the districts went together and we contracted for, 260 megawatts of power from Sempra Energy. We bought a 25-year contract that gives us a 25-year access to their gas-fired plant. We didn't buy an asset. We didn't buy the piece of the plant. We bought a 25-year power purchase arrangement that would give us access to that plant. They can raise the price a little bit for labor cost or maintenance or something but it's a very flat deal. We actually bought access to that plant for 25 years. So the big variable now is natural gas. We've got the ability to hedge that for quite a ways out. We're looking at 8 to 9 years, and even through some unique things with some production sources, we can go even further to take advantage of this 3 cent. I mean, we're looking at that as the way that we're going to be able to cap some of our costs at around 5 to 6 cents a kilowatt hour for a long ways out. So you bet we've got it in mind, and we've already done something to
So
fix it.
we'll come back to this question of how farmers and irrigation districts are coping with the change. But if I could have you, Brian and Ed, talk a little bit further about how does energy really impact the whole, we talked about the agricultural costs, but in this whole equation about agriculture in the region, what role does the general part now, and then we'll go on to how you're specifically dealing with the situation.
Good segue, because that was the question I was getting ready to respond to.
Okay.
But I want to mention one thing about, hopefully Ron might get into a little bit later because it's more of a subset, but we focus on the energy to pump groundwater, what it costs to buy our CAP water, which is energy-based. It's some big ticket stuff, but there's a tremendous amount of on-farm costs with embedded energy costs. Anything petroleum-based that they use, whether it's fertilizers, piping, all this stuff adds, as energy policy varies, it affects a number of other inputs that I don't have to worry about as energy district manager. Okay, here's some big picture numbers. When we started pulling this stuff together in 2009 with NGS got a creative focus. We got with one of our major farm credit who provides a lot of financing for the farmers in our area. And we have them do some sample crop budgets for CAP districts. And it would be a different thing for maybe somebody like Ed's district where it doesn't have CAP water, but for CAP districts, which is primarily Pinal County agriculture, what's the percentage of their water cost? That's part of their farm budget. It approaches 25%. 25% of their farm budget is what they pay us for water. Boom. So you have a 10 to 15 to 20, 30% potential increase in that feature alone. Profitability gets squeezed very, very, very quickly. Now, for Maricopa Stanfield, this year our budget's a little bit less because water availability is down. But in 2012, and 2011 and 2012 were pretty big water years. We were looking at about a $19 million budget. $15 million of that budget was our cost to buy CAP water and to pump groundwater. Not to fix the wells, not the operation and maintenance, not the payroll, not the equipment, not anything other than purchasing a resource. 75% of that budget was purchasing a resource. Probably, of what we pay for our total water costs, I'm going to say 90% of the CAP is probably almost directly energy related. Obviously, there's some other things. We have some other fees, DWR fees and other things that get rolled into the water cost. So you're basically looking at 70% of our budget is energy driven. So obviously, anything that's happening in the marketplace has a great effect. Now, I just draw a little bit of perspective too. One of the side benefits of building the Central Arizona project. Obviously, we had a situation back then where we were heavily encouraged by the Secretary of the Interior to get a groundwater law passed so you can get the Central Arizona project. It has had a lot of benefits coming in and being able to do that. But CAP water was supposed to get us off the groundwater. In our particular district, we developed probably 90,000 acres of farmland strictly 100% groundwater. In the glory years in the 50s and the 60s, we were pumping groundwater like crazy. Huge benefit, wonderful agricultural area. We may have had 500 wells on any one particular day in the summer, maybe pulling 300 kW. We'll do the math, whatever that is. Okay. That's what our power provider had to plan for. When we came in and built the Central Arizona project for our district and acquired the operational control of the wells, we all of a sudden had control of those 500 points of delivery and consolidated them down to a manageable amount to combine with our CAP water. Not only did we have cost savings, but the power needs of our power provider dropped dramatically because their peak summer needs. Now, what they were doing before CAP is they were using the hydropower that they could purchase off the Colorado River, which is a cost-based. Okay, they're paying whatever the costs are of those plants. That's what's paid, and that was the deal that was originally done when the dams were built. But then they were purchasing at market rates in our case, it was from APS. And there was a block of power that became very, very expensive, and as groundwater levels went down, it became unaffordable. When CAP came in, then all of a sudden we created a new energy power nexus which really benefited us. Now, that margin created then has almost entirely evaporated with changes. And I'll point out one other thing. Wonderful chart here that's showing the effects of water rates, but one other big policy issue that really gets tied in with energy is CAP Agriculture entered into an agreement that was part of the Gila River water settlement. And in that, we gave up some priority in our water, lowered the priority, but we got more water in exchange. Okay? The pricing for that was totally energy driven. When we started that pricing scheme in 2004, I think we were about 28. I know our growers always have $25, but $28. Okay. Without incentives, the cost this year is 53. So we've gone from 28 to 53 in 9 years. 100% increase. They're projecting, even before the latest stuff coming on, $68 by 2018. Now it's without incentives, mind you. We're going to be about 160% increase in 14 years. Energy driven, okay? So what's that doing? Well, the benefit that we've had in the last couple of years is increased affordability because commodity prices have been in a position to flex with that. That is, they don't stay, they fluctuate. And the degree to which they will stay creates an ability, but as soon as they start going back down, your margin closes right out. That's kind of the big picture in terms of energy prices that we face on a daily basis. The other thing, on a daily basis, it's interesting that 1,000 kilowatt hours per acre. I mean, it's District 1. But one of the things we look at every single day, we're looking at the wells we're running and trying to pick those ones that are running the least kilowatt hours per acre foot, so that energy bill is as low as it possibly can be.
No, that I think is very helpful. Brian comes from Maricopa-Stanfield Irrigation District, which is in Pinal County, and he painted for us a very, picture specific to his district, but as also the wider area. But I turn to you, Ed, to talk about Buckeye, which is in a very different place in this central Arizona region. And what I think we need to appreciate here is the variation, is the large difference between what our different irrigation districts face. So if you could just elaborate on that part.
Do you like apples or oranges? One or the other.
Apples right now.
Okay, so I'll do the orange. We're small in comparison to Brian. Our annual budget is $3 million. Where we're situated in what we call the Buckeye Valley is the Gila watershed is the size of the New England states, and everything drains through Buckeye. You've got the White Tanks to the north, you've got the Australia Mountain foothills to the south. There's a pinch point in what's creating a waterlogging effect for those of you who know the area. So while Ron and Brian are pumping at from 1,000 feet or 1,000 kilowatt hours per acre foot, ours are around 144 kilowatt hours per acre foot.
Oh, really?
All that being, and we have roughly a mixture of 105,000 acre feet annually we get from 94.7 the wastewater treatment plant and SRP tailwater. So we're pumping roughly 40% of the water. That being said, it's still 30% of our budget, and it's the biggest cost on our expense side. So it's a huge impact to our growers. We monitor it very, since it's such a big issue, we monitor it religiously. And the hard part about power policy is you need to be 5 to 10 years ahead, looking 30 to 40 years out. So we're going through the reallocation process now with Hoover. That was a 30-year contract. This renewal is going to be a 50-year contract. So really need to focus on the today to plan for the future. We're part of that agreement that Ron mentioned, the SPUR agreement. It's actually a virtual natural gas plant. So we get the capacity and the energy from not just one plant, but they can service us from 6 plants. And it gives the Sempra Energy a lot of flexibility, gives us a lot of flexibility, and it's really about hedging your bets because obviously there is a push to I'll just say kill coal. And coal's gone from a 52% base load down to 40% base load. Obviously, there's some benefits that we're seeing from that, reduction in particulates and air pollution. But circling back to the CAP discussion, one of the alternatives to building NGS was to put another hydroelectric dam in the Colorado River. So if that was there today, we wouldn't have this BART decision going on.
Could I add one
But we have other problems.
Yeah, okay, one quick point.
It just goes with all of this, back to the hydropower with the APA issue, I'm glad Sharon brought it up. Is one of the reasons we're fighting so hard to hold on to what we've got is because what you're seeing here in terms of the trend with potentially going back to groundwater. Okay, we're going to have greater and greater demand for the best mix of power and energy resources to be able, because we're going to have to transition back to more groundwater pumping. And we too, our power provider, we only have one, Electric District 3, is in the mix as part owner of another, I think it's a coal or a natural gas. I don't know the specifics, but I know they're doing that to create a larger portfolio for them in the future, to do the same thing you guys are doing with something.
So this portion, this block of the session, we thought would be more about understanding the current situation, and I want to make sure that the audience is with us. So I'll open the floor up to questions related to, did you get what is going on? So that's the point right now. Our next block will be about more, we'll get into more of the details and controversies regarding how our farmers, irrigation district managers and water managers coping with the situation. But let's focus right now. Do we understand first what's going on? Okay, what the challenge really is. So I'll invite questions on that part. Anything that was not clear in what was pointed out, I know there was a lot of information given, and that's very helpful. We got a very broad spectrum of things here. But yeah, please. So anybody who would like to raise a question, clarification.
I didn't hear anything
and
about.
if we could have you
Well, I'm
please
Chuck
introduce
Redmond.
yourself.
I didn't hear anything about the quality of the water, and I was particularly interested in Buckeye and whether it's cheaper, but you can't use it on all the crops, or what's up?
Sure. Our best source of water is the effluent. It comes in at 1550 TDS parts per million. You have salt tolerant crops. Vegetables are in the 800 parts per million range. You start getting up to 1200. There's some spinach and some other things that are more high value crop that are still salt resistant. But a lot of our wells are 2000 or 2500 parts plus. I think seawater is roughly 6,000. So we're not that far away from seawater. Our blended canal water is 2,000 at the end of the system during the summer when we have all the wells running. So that really isolates the cropping pattern and the crops that we can grow in our area.
If I might add, that's an excellent question because, see, you beat me on efficiency, but I can beat you on water quality.
So this is why we have the two of them always in the panel.
We have the benefit of the total TDS in the wells that we acquired when we took them over as a part of the project was very similar to CAP water when it came in. And so that made for a much easier, although the water in terms of softness and hardness was different, it made for a much easier transition for our growers to go from groundwater to CAP water because they weren't noticing that big difference. So one of the concerns we have as we go deeper in the aquifer, whether or not we're going to get degradation of quality, and one of the concerns that our growers do have, we will introduce more and more groundwater into our system with the CAP water. That's going to change the mix. So they're going to have to become used to that and see how that affects what their crop choices are.
Let me just jump. I have a passing interest in water quality, but some very interesting work is going on right now at the U of A. Wendell Ela, who's a chemical engineer, you may know Professor Ela, is doing some work on Navajo Nation using renewable energy technology, so solar panels on a desal, little mini desal plant in a well. So you probably know of this, but I think that's very exciting. It's in its pilot stages right now. But if that technology looks like it could go, that could be very, very promising for some of our groundwater areas in Arizona that have very high saline, high TDS groundwater, and Buckeye sure is one.
That would definitely be beneficial, but that goes back to the water power nexus. The amount of power that it takes to desalinate if you go through the traditional
That's why they have
reverse
the little
osmosis.
solar panels, so they're trying this renewable thing.
Well, yeah, but
Yeah.
there's still a huge power component to desalinating water.
And it also goes to continued reliance on groundwater.
So we'll have Candace, and if you can introduce.
Sure. Candace Hartman, Assistant Director of School Sustainability. I wanted to address a slightly different angle on water quality as related to energy and this whole mix. As a few of you mentioned, the big variable being natural gas, and as more and more natural gas comes from shale sources, we may see more regulation around fracking. As we know that there are water quality and air quality and various other implications of that practice, and we're starting to see some regulations from EPA. And I read an article recently that said that if we get the actual type of regulations that they would predict, the International Energy Agency, or they said that they would potentially see a 7% increase in the price of natural gas in the U.S. So I'm wondering what kind of impact that would have in terms of, for your various endeavors if natural gas were to go up in price by 7% over that year.
By 7%?
Yeah, if we see.
I mean, frankly, that's nothing, because, I mean, it's fallen, the price of natural gas has fallen in half.
Right.
From where it was. I mean, we were a natural gas supplier because we had a lot of our own customers in the electric district that were running natural gas engines. We had a wholesale purchase program for them. These are 400 horsepower, great big V12 engines, cat engines running at 800 RPM. And at $8, it finally made them stop, because when it got up that high, and it, unfortunately it was at the end of the summer, and we were just buying it on a month-to-month basis with no contract. So when it's back down around $3 now, and that was 15 years ago, so at $3 now, I mean, it's very attractive. So even a 7% or 10% or 15%, it would still make it very attractive. And unfortunately, all the renewable resources that we see, and frankly, we had a lot of companies approach us, and we looked very strongly at trying to integrate photovoltaic or something, and it absolutely didn't make sense. There's no way, because for one thing, tax breaks and everything don't mean anything to us. We're a municipal entity, and so you're not paying taxes. You're not getting that extra measure of saving, and the cost per kilowatt hour, the best we could figure on that was around 14 cents a kilowatt hour, and we can go out and buy it for almost a third of that.
Well, and I had a discussion with the general manager of EV3. I think if I was understanding him correctly, the cost of nuclear power was running between 12 and 14 cents. And so you've got another source of energy out there that's really not outside the bounds of market. We don't seem to be considering it, but it's another option. One other thing I would say about natural gas is you can afford to go up in that price, especially if while you're doing it, you're increasing the amount of natural gas that you're producing. Because if it stays your cheapest source, you increase the amount, and it still is the cheapest source, even though it's becoming more expensive. You still maintain your affordability, because then you have a higher percentage, perhaps, of your power using that less expensive. So you still may get the benefits, and you might lose. Now, what I would caution, and you may get from my comments, EPA is not our friend. Okay? And I will tell you that it's not. And if I just hate paying for stuff that makes no sense. So where it makes sense, where it's scientifically based, all right, let's talk about it and let's do what we have to do. But too many times, at least in our industry, we are saddled with stuff directly driven by the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act that isn't based in good science, and it's taking money out of the economy, and it's taken out of the pocketbooks of our ability to do things. So we're very sensitive to what somebody in Washington has a decision to do about something that's happening in North and South Dakota. Just a bias there, I'll let you know.
Oh, really?
There's one other question we will take and then move on to the next block. So there was.
No, I'm
well, all right, I'll ask the question. You haven't addressed the growth issue. And how is that going to affect agriculture? There are virtually no farmers in Maricopa County, east Maricopa County. What's going to happen? How do you see it coming out on the west side?
Well.
Yeah, you're on the west
Shall I
side.
start? You know, one of the things that I've, for a long time, you know, had a real conflicted position, I guess, internally, trying to figure out, you know, do you try to maintain agriculture in any big acreage? I'll tell you, one of the things that I came up with was somebody told me once, said, you know, I'd rather be bought out than sold out, meaning by your banker. And when you look at the way the water laws were directed, basically, we thought when the Groundwater Management Act was implemented, that agriculture had a 3 acre-foot per acre M&I conversion right for your existing groundwater use. And we did for a couple of years until the assured water supply rules were put in place, and it negated the value of that. So basically, right now, there's almost no incentive for builders to buy ag land and develop it. They can join the CAGRD and go out and buy a bunch of desert ground that's never had water used on it before and create a new use. I'd always kind of envisioned that, well, you know, there would always be a conversion of ag water use over into urban uses, and unless you started having some real restrictions on, you know, on building and or frankly just having high commodity prices slows down the conversion, and we see that in California, which by the way we started farming some in California, and they passed that thing that we rejected years ago, and I was definitely against, but it was that whatever it was, smart urban boundary. Yeah, the urban boundary deal, and now, you know, they have that over there where, you know, until the city gets right up against it and they absolutely have no place to grow, then they can take in a little more ground. But it's kind of an automatic ag preservation vehicle in the Central Valley of California. You don't have to worry about it. You know, you don't have anything to sell for urban use, and the pricing of the ground is that way as well. It's ag land values. Gosh, we bought a lot better land with a lot better quality water over there. And I'm sorry.
It's wet water.
Yeah. But you know, but it gave me a whole different perspective. But this is one issue that's got to come up. You know, I mean, Arizona has plenty of land. You know, and water is absolutely the limiting factor. And what are you going to use it for? You know, and it would be too bad to not have agriculture, irrigated agriculture, as part of you know, economic activity in Central Arizona, or it's where most of it is. But you know, it could happen. I mean, it can happen if you have a lot more people that want to live here, and the resources, they're absolutely finite.
That's our next block of questions about the coping and viability, but I'll let Brian respond quickly.
And I think I just had a conference last week with Family Farm Alliance, and they essentially represent 17 western states and irrigated agriculture in that. And they've done a couple of wonderful studies just looking at ag-urban water transfers, but just the value of water and the value that irrigated agriculture presents in 17 western states. And the 30,000 foot elevation view that I will tell people is that you've got all this wonderful land for farming, some of the most productive farmland, and you have irrigated agriculture where you're controlling your inputs, which creates an environment for the most efficient way of producing food and fiber. But we're in the West, where a lot of our land is publicly owned, either state or federal. It's parks, it's Indian reservations, whatever, so we don't have as much land. And everybody likes it out here so much in the 17 western states that they're moving from the water-rich places in the Northeast to the Southwest, and they're not bringing any water with them. So then we have this exaggerated, if you will, competition for this resource. I would be one that would argue that every state in those 17 western states ought to be looking at retaining a certain core of agricultural production from any number of issues that the Family Farm Alliance is much better than I am articulating, but there's some value there. I'll just throw out one number. They determined there, in terms of household income generated by irrigated agriculture, was $128 billion in the 17 western states. Arizona's share is somewhere between $3 and $4 billion. It's not chump change.
So on that note of, we see value in irrigated agriculture here. We want to maintain the viability. We have been made aware of these challenges that we face. Let's turn over to going from numbers now to more storytelling. We are very fortunate to have people actually working on the ground, getting their hands dirty with this. So could you, and I'll start with you, we'll go this way now, Ed, about some stories about how are people coping with it. And perhaps one way to think about it would be, have there been past events which pose similar challenges, and perhaps you could give examples from the past, or currently we've had a very significant increase in commodity prices which has led to a lot of pressure on water demand, and then we've heard about how in the future we are seeing something like 160% increase. So something maybe looking at past lessons, but thinking over into how we can think about transforming the system. What are the options out there if we are thinking out of the box?
Sure. I've been with the district 6 years, so my historical background might not be as extensive as a couple of my counterparts, but I started right as development pressure was being heaped upon Buckeye. We're 30 miles west, we're 6 miles south of I-10, so we were kind of the last bastion of growth in the sense of way out on the growth curve, but we were feeling it. Land values went from $5,000 to $10,000 an acre. They were selling upwards of $70,000 an acre, and when it comes to competing with agricultural production versus a sevenfold increase in your land value, most of the farmers opted to sell to developers, but with that thought process in mind that we were converting rapidly and that we were going to be growing rooftops as opposed to alfalfa, we started negotiations with the town of Buckeye as part potential ag to urban water transfer, utilizing our assets. We have 30 miles of canal. We have 40 wells that we need power to run in. The power costs money. So if there was one farmer left on the district, we were required to service him, but he would be paying the whole conveyance and operating costs of the whole canal system. So we were looking for other ways to get outside the box to bring in revenue and utilize our existing assets. I'll go off tangent because you talked about thinking outside the box. We've been around since 1886. The farmers have owned the canal since 1907. Over the course of the last 100+ years, we've acquired roughly 1,000 acres of property within our 22,000 acre district. So we do some farming on that as revenue source, but being a municipal district or municipal corporation, we have the power to create parks and recreation. So one of the food for thought questions I'm posing for my board is, as things start to go away, you might consider moving into the active recreation arena for parks and recreation as a supplemental income source.
So, and Brian, I'd like you to elaborate on that, but also talk about, is there some sort of, how are our districts cooperating in this? How are you thinking at maybe the inter-district level, state level? So
it's perhaps a little bit more of a challenge for us because our water portfolio is a different one, where you've got surface water rights, where all we have at our disposal is our irrigation grandfathered pumping rights, and the water we get from CAP is strictly contractual. So it's based on a contractual arrangement, pricing arrangement, and availability. So there's less of a value in terms of trading. However, we have been involved for quite some time, and this is part of the state water planning effort, in terms of reducing our groundwater pumping by taking more surface water through, mutual arrangements, which is providing a storage of surface water below ground for Indian water rights farming, for water management farming. We've stored a tremendous amount of Nevada's water to, help them when drought comes along. Now we're going to have to produce that in the future, probably. So you will have. You're making a deposit now. You'll have. You're going to have to take it out of the bank later. But we've been able to participate in that from a larger water standpoint basis. We work together with our sister district, Central Arizona Irrigation District, is just about a twin sister with us. They've got a little bit more resource in terms of hydropower available to them through their particular electric districts than we do. We may have in the future some ability because we share a canal system. 1/3 of their district is served off the main canal that we operate for doing some exchanges back and forth, perhaps, of groundwater they could pump in at times that we would need it and run it downstream. Nothing formal yet, just stuff like that is on the horizon. We have the benefit of coming along late in life relative to a district like Ed's, because we came in as a CAP district. We came in with a lot of things that we knew we had to plan for in the design of our system. It had to have high enough capacity to meet the efficient irrigation systems of the day, which were level basin ports, the ability to get a high flow of water to the crop very quickly so you can evenly get to the root zone. So that was built in. We were building in a supervisory control system so we can operate much of the system from the office. So we have a lot of advantages built in, but that cost us money. So there's a lot of carrying charges in that system that other districts don't have, but we have water efficiencies that other districts don't have. So you kind of have that mix. So we kind of start out a little bit better off. But we are kind of at the end of in our own little basin there, and I don't want to say isolated, but without a lot of infrastructure, it kind of leaves you in a place where those types of things, we're going to have to be a lot more out of the box and a lot more creative in terms of how we do it.
So looking from the outside, many of us often, you must be hearing this quite a lot, that why don't they use more water-saving technologies? So could you elaborate a little bit, maybe some stories on why is it that we don't see more of the supposedly water-saving technologies?
Well, and it's in the eye of the beholder. There is the idea out there that if you don't see a drip system pump for sprinklers, that an efficient farm system is not in use. And not everybody in the city can come down and visit us as much as you have, but one of the key things about farm efficiency is, from our standpoint as a district, being able to give the right amount of water to the grower when he needs it, the amount he needs it, so we can match it to the system that he has. He is going to take his system and match it to the soil type and the slopes and what he's also trying to grow on there. And so a level based on high flow situation where you're throwing a bunch of water out there, someone that's not attuned to that will look at that and go, well, they're wasting water. No, they're not, because that water, if it's designed well for the soil type, it's going to be the most efficient way to get it to the root zone without it suffering too much evaporation. It's all about get it to the root zone. You want as little water to go past the root zone, unless you've got to flush out some salts and stuff. But that's your goal. Well, level basin, it's the most efficient in some areas. And when I first went to work for the district, this is on the old John Wayne Ranch, they had invested in this huge drip system on a farm that was already level basin. But they already had an efficient, they were trying to squeeze that last drop of efficiency with that next system. It couldn't pay for itself. The cost of that system did not generate enough water savings because they already had an efficient system. So there were resources wasted in that particular case because there wasn't the economic return. Whatever these folks invest in, there's got to be the return. And right now, we're seeing in our district, I've got a larger farming operation that's come in. They're putting up about 6 center pivots. That covers about a 1/4 mile square, about 105, 106 acres per center pivot. Those are expensive, but right now there's a window of opportunity to finance it. If you can get it in, finance it, then it's just maintaining it afterwards. There's a window of opportunity these guys are grabbing. There's some cost-sharing programs with the federal government to do that. We have a window of affordability, so now you're seeing some of that stuff come in, and it's going to pay dividends down the road. But there's affordability now where there might not have been 5 years ago.
So Ron, would you like to elaborate on that?
Well, irrigation efficiency you know, has a lot of facets to it. And one of the things that I think the Department of Water Resources found out after we fought over water duties and irrigation efficiency targets was that they're very site specific, what you can do and what you can't. And one of the things that I still like to point out to people, you know, when you live long enough, you get to say, I told you so. And, but, you know, when we had the AMA set up, Phoenix AMA, the low point of the AMA is just down below the end of Ed's district at the old Gillespie Dam. That's where the AMA boundary line ends. And guess what? You know, there's a USGS gauge on that old dam. And I happen to have a water right below that, that we divert water out of there. So I watch that very carefully all the time and have for most of my life. But, you know, if back when that Groundwater Management Act was implemented, there was some kind of an assumption that was made that agriculture was about 65% efficient, application efficiency. Does anybody remember that? You know, if that were really true, if they just thought about it then, where in the hell is the rest of the water going? If the plant is only, you know, has a use that's, you know, determined by the evapotranspiration rate, that's the one thing that happens to water when you apply it to ground is the plant uses it, gets evaporated. What are the other two things that can happen to water if you don't apply it right, irrigation water? It runs off the end, or it goes too deep in the ground below the root zone, so it's out of the reach. That's the only things that can happen. So if that 65% were really true, then you had to be running off a whole bunch of water, or you had to be putting a whole bunch down in the ground. Well, you know, it was put into place. We were all mandated to put in these efficiency, well, we had to, or we couldn't meet our water duty. If you only had a 5 acre-foot water duty, you better not be wasting much water on something, because in your crop mix, you're going to use up that whole amount and go in the hole. I guess my point in going through this whole thing is that I will guarantee you that the amount of water that's reaching the Gillespie Dam today is, it might be slightly smaller, but it's because of all the power plants taking the water out of the river. But for a long time, that number never changed. I mean, the amount of water that got to Gillespie Dam was the same back then as it is now. So it just tells me either there's a whole bunch of water that was going in the ground somewhere up the stream, or the most likely thing is that you had a trickle-down effect. In an area-wide use, any water that ran off of my farm, if I was in the Salt River Project, would run to the next guy, they'd capture it, use it, it'd get used and reused. So the only place that made any difference was the guy at the upper end of the ditch and the guy at the bottom end of the ditch. So there was no, you know, as an area-wide basis, we probably had an efficiency even then in the 80s or 90s.
I guess we can just keep on. I mean, this is such an interesting issue about what efficiency really means, and at the farm level and at the basin-wide level. But I think we'll need to move on a little bit. So I'll turn to Karen and Katasha to speak more now about this bottom line issue. If we want to maintain viability of agriculture, irrigated agriculture in this region, what does it mean in terms of perhaps policy? That's what Karen, perhaps you could address, and Katasha, from your end, from the CAP end, and you also have experience with tribal water rights. If you could speak more about this now, we've heard the ground level, farm level picture, but now more at the state level, if you want to maintain viability, what would it take?
Well, a lot. But let me just throw out a couple more numbers, even though you've heard a lot of numbers. Projected population figures for the state of Arizona, mid-level series 2020, 10.5 million people. Right, we're at 6.5 right now. USBR study about the Colorado River, what we might see, 3 million acre feet less flow in the Colorado River by 2060. So that seems a long way off, and it is. But I think we need to think about some of these things. More people coming here, less water resources available for us as a state? And then how do we think about how we use these water resources and yet maintain all the things we want to do? And I'm a firm believer that we need to maintain irrigated agriculture. Perhaps not at the same level that we have today, but I'm not sure that every farmer wants to keep farming. But I think we need to maintain some irrigated agriculture. So how do we do that with all these other pressures, including dropping groundwater levels? Now, it rises in some areas. Ed, I think some of your people wish it would drop more than it does. But so we still have these declining groundwater levels. You know, in our AMAs, we are not at safe yield. So how do we put all that together in a pot and make it work? My own sense is that we can all be more efficient. I understand what you're saying about agricultural efficiency. I think it very much is site-specific. I think it is farm to farm, even sub-farm to sub-farm. But we can all do more. I think we can do more in urban areas. We can probably do a lot more in urban areas to reduce our water use. So if all the water use was reduced 5%, 10%, ag could reduce 10%. You know, right now ag uses about 68% of all the water that's used in Arizona. And that's true everywhere, so it's not just something here in Arizona. But if we could reduce that 5%, if on the urban side we could reduce our uses 5%, I mean, we'd start to then create some water that could be used to maintain some things. For the ag side, I also am a firm believer in sending incentives to try and encourage more efficient agriculture. We do it in a lot of other areas. I'd like to see more incentives for farms to put into place more efficient measures for those who aren't already doing what they can do. And there are some, I know you guys will agree with me, not every farm in Arizona is a water efficient farm. More can be done. More can always be done. So I think, you know, at that level, I think we need to talk about that. And I think Ron had a really good point. I think our friends on the CAP board and around the valley really need to think about the role of the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. I think that that has assumed a role in our society that we never intended it to do, which was to go to raw desert land and put out subdivision. And that is happening far, far too much. That's not what we thought it would be.
I see that end of the table getting edgy, but I'll turn to Natasha first, and then we'll return back. We'll ask for your comments. So, Natasha, if you want to add on to that.
So the question was, how can we improve or ensure the viability of farming into the future? I'll speak probably from a more personal perspective than from a CAP perspective. I don't think we have a choice. Now, one of the things that CAP has allowed me to do is to learn a heck of a lot more about irrigated agriculture. I grew up in southeastern Oklahoma, which people call Little Dixie, and some people say that's where the Old South meets the New West. So an interesting mix of cattle and ranching and farming and the Dust Bowl era through there. So when I moved out here, I just thought it was insane that people were irrigating the desert. How do you do that? You know, it's the Midwest, it's the back east where you farm and do these sorts of things. I have learned a lot in my time just living in Arizona and understanding now. I think the conference Brian was referencing, I attended last week as well. I think it's 80% of U.S. farm output comes from the 17 western states that are irrigated agriculture. So when we talk about efficiencies, you're also talking about people who can grow crops more reliably through irrigation than they can out east where you're relying more on rain and some of those types of things. And we talk about growth and people coming to Arizona. And from a policy perspective, you know, people need food and they need water. And these are the real issues that are confronting us in the agricultural sector. Food security is a growing concern worldwide. And the U.S. has enormous food output, and yet we're losing our farms at a startling pace. There have to be trade-offs, and we have to figure out how we're going to balance these types of things. But urban interests are not necessarily opposed to agriculture interest. I think there's always this sense that you're either an urban interest or you're a farm interest, and that those are adversaries. I don't think that's true. The urban interests are the customers of the farmers. And when you talk about household incomes, what's the percentage of a person's household income? We can grow our cities, we can bring more people here and think, I don't know, we're going to get more income tax space coming off of these people, but what are they going to be spending their household income on? It's going to be food. I think we saw a chart from like 1929, so 30–40% of people's household income was going to food post-war era. Now it's somewhere in the ballpark of 6 or 7%. If that relationship changes dramatically, we're also in a world where people don't know how to grow their own food anymore, and there's no land left to grow it on. You can only put so many rooftop gardens up and expect people to farm that and take their food from that. You mentioned that I also do tribal work. Tribes more and more, now that they're getting greater access to water, are looking at farming enterprises. They want to do farming for a number of reasons, including culture. Which also is one of the 5 needs of man: food, clothing, shelter, culture. That's one of the big issues for them, to bring back their traditional way of life. But it's also a very serious health concern for tribes out there, because they have been subject to having to buy healthy foods. Healthy foods were not readily provided to them. So they've been paying those market prices, and it's led to some socioeconomic concerns in those communities. If we start doing that in our other mainstream sectors, you might look at tribes in some respects as the miner's canary for what is happening with larger agricultural issues. I don't think we have a choice. I think there are lots of conversations to be had. Conservation is important. I think kids are learning much earlier, and increasing emphasis needs to be placed with children who are ready audiences to accept that kind of information about how we don't waste water and those types of things. But we don't have a choice.
I think this is a good segue to open it up to the audience. So unless you have a very immediate concern, I hope it'll be addressed through the audience questions. So
Let
we
me
go.
just bring up
Okay,
that.
yeah, sure.
I picked this up off my desk when I left the office. This is a Capital Press. It's a newspaper out of the Northwest. Their little headline: U.S. farmland shrinks 3 million acres, and this is just their latest issue. And I had not seen that, and it kind of struck me that nationwide here, you know, we've been in a recession, for crying out loud. You'd think that not many land conversions would be happening, but this is just in a recent measure. So I was surprised to see that. So yeah, it's something we need to think about.
Just
Ryan,
a
just
couple of facts, because goes to what Katasha was saying. After World War II, 25% of household income was dedicated to food costs and purchase of food. As of 2011, the statistics now below 7%. So the difference, that drop, and so the increase in productivity in what the United States is able to do in terms of food and fiber, that just goes to discretionary spending in each household, and that is a lot of what helps fuel the economy. The thing about the balance of conservation and urban and ag interests with water, and we listened to another thing that was talking about in the presentation. When you really put some of the calculations to it, usually when you're talking about reduced water to agriculture, you are talking about reduced acreage, which means reduced production. So when you do that, please do it with eyes wide open as to what you get. Now, another way of looking at conservation is getting more units of production out of the same water use. Okay, well, the combination of both of those makes sense, and with balance, and there's another outfit called Agree that I think is just fabulous, because it's something that Family Farm Alliance has been touting, but it is pulling together agricultural interests, conservation interests, development interests, and saying, look, we need a common ground for solving the water use issues if we're going to have food security in this country. And they've come up with, it's an educational process for both sides to get to know one another better. I think the state of Arizona has done a fabulous job, and already we are ahead of the curve in this state over other states in terms of the urban and agricultural sectors getting their heads together on how we solve state problems. We just need to stay ahead of the curve.
So on that note, yeah, I'll open it up to the audience. Yes.
Well,
and again, please introduce.
I'm Guy Carpenter. I'm with Corlo Engineers and on the CAP board. I saw a presentation a few years ago from the USDA that said that in 2006 we became a net importer of food and fiber. So if we're already that vulnerable, and things like what EPA is doing with driving our prices up for energy, doesn't that affect more than just Arizona? I mean, that's a national security issue that it seems like they're leaving up to us to deal with on our own. So can you comment on that?
Well, you know, that was one of the things that was brought up by Family Farm Alliance. One of the things that study that Brian quoted earlier, the author of that report, the economist that produced that, you know, went through this whole scenario, and he was illustrating that drop in spending for food, and that in the terms of security, he was actually saying the security in that is the amount of money that it was freeing up for other things with our personal income. But the net result of that study, and I thought it was a very interesting thing, that as Brian mentioned, that it was in net personal income, $128 billion in value. But he also came out with a number that was a value per acre foot of water that was utilized, and it went anywhere from $1,500 to $2,500 an acre foot is the value of irrigation water when you put it through the economic system, and that's the kind of you know, the value of it once you do that. And that also, that was in net personal income. And I had to ask him personally, you know, help me get my arms around that deal. How do you represent it? I can understand farm gate value of goods and that sort of thing, but net personal income. So I said, you mean that affects everyone in the West to that degree? And he said, yes. Sorry.
Dave, yeah.
Thank you. First, I wanted to sort of commend you for the comment about the need for the urban interest, the agricultural interest to continue a dialogue, and I want to thank you all for being here, for being part of that. I think this is a great forum that Bridget and Hallie and Abby have put together. One of the things that does connect the urban agricultural interest is municipal wastewater and effluent, and that's, I was interested to hear your comment about effluent being some of the highest quality water in terms of TDS that you receive. Could any of you just comment on the role of effluent in the agricultural sector moving forward, and the potential, as we've seen some declines in effluent production with the somewhat declining municipal demand and thus declining wastewater production? So how does that factor into your thinking moving forward?
I'll take that. I mean, really, when the APS versus Long case went to court, we created a new class of water. Effluent was considered a new class of water, a nuisance water for the cities or municipalities to dispose of however they see fit. So you take it out of the surface and groundwater laws and take it back to the cities, and you wrap in safe yield and all those other issues. So it really boils down to economics. Is it better to recharge it and offset the 300 or the CGRD rates? We had the benefit of tying it up in 1971 where no one wanted it, and we had a 40-year contract. We have 4 5-year options. We just executed the first of one of those options. But as we move forward, there's a concept called toilet to tap. I see that becoming more prevalent. It's not direct reuse. It's recharge, filtered through the ground, and then pulled back out and reused. So the value of water is it's hard to quantify, but in the desert where we get 7 inches of rain, we have 70 inches of evaporation a year. Conservation is a huge issue. We use more per capita than residents in Boston, than residents in Minneapolis. They get 28 to 32 inches of precipitation per year. We get 7 roughly, and we're using more water per capita than those cities. So, granted, a lot of that might be landscaping. 50 to 60% of municipal or residential use goes in landscaping. But some of those policy issues, maybe going to community pools, xeriscaping on landscaping, some of the water reduction can happen there, because there's obviously this whole panel is wanting to talk about water power nexus, but there's a water food nexus that people don't realize and recognize. They say, where does food come from? Well, a lot of kids these days say Safeway or Bashas', and and they miss the connection of how water goes through, irrigates the crops and gets to the plate.
Let me mention that the little example I gave a while ago about the efficiency of agricultural water use, it also goes to the whole AMA. So the efficiency of the AMA is quite good. I mean, people talk about increasing the reuse of effluent. Well, below the diversion dam that he has in the Gila River below Phoenix, I guarantee you, I haven't seen, except when you dried up your canal, that there was any water going past that. So they capture virtually all of it. You may have a contract for part of it, but anything that's in excess of that, it's out of the river, so they have a diversion right, so they divert it all and utilize it all. Anything they don't use, they get dumped back in the Hassayampa River at the end of their canal. And then I get a chance at it down at Gillespie Dam, and so then I divert it if there's any left. And it's rare that any goes past the Gillespie Dam. The Paloma Irrigation District, they have a legal diversion right, as well as Enterprise Ranch. And so, the efficiency on an AMA-wide basis is really quite high, whether it's dealing with ag or with wastewater reuse. You don't see any big gusher going to the ocean through Eagle Bend, not at all. All of the water is staying here and it's being used.
One of the things, this is a conference I went to about 5 years ago, and in talking about the understanding of the benefits that the urban community wants to see, and a lot of there's pushes for open space, there's pushes for green areas. Well, if that open space green area happens to be the farm that's right next to that urban area and you want to preserve that, that's a value to that urban community. But that doesn't put any money in his pocket. And this is a paradigm shift that probably needs to take place if we're going to balance these two, is to understand that there's an inherent value there that we may want to have as a community with the balance of this stuff. Well, why would you have golf courses in the desert? Well, if you got rid of all the golf courses, it'd be a lot hotter here because you have the heat island effect. I grew up in Southern California. There was one golf course right on a freeway. Literally, if you had your window down on a hot summer day, you'd be cool for about 300 feet. Just the backward chance coming off the grass and the trees and everything, there's benefit there. Well, we don't often put all those benefits, we don't weigh them appropriately, I think, among the different water use sectors. And we're starting to do that better, I think, to understand the values of what's going to environmental use and trying to quantify, well, what needs to go there? What should go there? What do we as a society value going there? Obviously, I provide water to commercial agriculture. That's where my heart is. That's where my family roots are. I think sometimes we're misunderstood that, part of the problem is us. We don't tell everybody what we're doing. We're independent. We just go about our business. Farmers do that. And all of a sudden they go, all this stuff is happening to us. Well, did you ever get together and figure out that it's happening to you and stand up as a group? Well, we're now doing that to get the message out and say, look, there's some values here that you need to consider. And this food security thing I think is very huge for this country on a national basis. And I would think the states individually really need to be looking at their own unique set of circumstances to say how much of this do we need to preserve. I'd argue.
We'll take one. Katasha has something to respond to, and then Paul has been holding his hand for quite some time. We're close to the end, so yeah. Huh? So.
Yeah, another question back there.
Okay, we'll see. So
Just one last thing, just to posit the thought that probably falls into the controversial realm for future meetings. But I'd be remiss coming from CAP if I didn't say, in addition to some of the conservation issues, I think you also have to think about augmentation into the future. Because people will look at that and say that's pie in the sky notion, way too expensive, they may have floods elsewhere, but you can't ever get a pipeline, you can't ever get a canal system, environmental risks, this and that. But there was a time in history when people thought you'd never get the CAP as well. But people worked, people studied, people built the case, people partnered, and now we have the CAP, and some of the things we heard today show you that are still very important for the future of the state. Augmentation is something we absolutely have to think about in the future.
Paul, and then close to our finish time.
I hope this isn't too complex a question. It relates, it's about the future of agriculture in Central Arizona. It relates to the point you made about the water-food nexus as well as the water-energy nexus. you said 68% of the agriculture in the state now goes to, 68% of the water in the state goes to agriculture. In 1980, it was about 85%. Our population is growing and our farm acreage is declining. So the trend has been towards a decline in agriculture. So one of the questions is, do we have agriculture in the future and what does it look like? The second part, what does it look like, is where I'm going to be headed. Data in your presentations indicated that the water that you get from CAP is below cost, significantly below cost. So in that sense, there's a public policy decision to provide a subsidy to keep agriculture capable of using this more expensive water. The cost of pumping, I think you mentioned that you get a special low discount wholesale rate from energy users to be able to pump water at a rate that can keep you in business. So we've already made a kind of a public policy decision to subsidize the continuation of agriculture. The last statistic that struck me was that more than 50% of the crops that we grow with that subsidized water is cotton and alfalfa. And so my question to you is the agricultural industry talking together at all about knowing that the future of agriculture is going to be based on public policy decisions and democratic support for sustaining agriculture in this region? Have you talked about whether a shift from cotton and alfalfa to more food-based crops grown within the vicinity of the city, especially with the current trend towards local sourcing of food and not buying crops that came from 10,000 miles away or 1,000 miles away. Does this seem like an opportunity to anybody in your industry to rethink agriculture of the future in Arizona, focus it more on edible foods and on marketing in the urban areas that are going to have to support these decisions to keep water cheap for you in order to keep agriculture flourishing in the state? Or do you think the question is off base?
Well, you know, it's an old question. I mean, we've dealt with that for years. I mean, we've looked at it already. You know, one of the things that as you drive west from Phoenix out toward Los Angeles, you know, if you look around in the area south of I-10, you won't see any vegetables being grown. You go north of I-10, you'll see vegetables, you'll see roses, you'll see all these things. What's the big difference? It's water quality, plain and simple. A big part of the area, especially all of the area that I farm in, you know, the average is probably 2,400 parts per million, 3 times the salinity of CAP water. We stopped growing potatoes on our farm back in about 66, I think it was, because the salinity got too high. Potatoes are very sensitive, salt sensitive, wouldn't work anymore. You know, again, it's very site specific, and the reason we grow alfalfa and the reason we grow cotton is a very resilient plant. It is one of the most thrifty at using water of any plant you'll find. And the reason, I mean, to back that up, if you look, what crop do they grow in the high plains of Texas? It's cotton. Why? Because if it's grown on rainfall, it can scour that soil for water better than any other crop that you can grow. And alfalfa, well, why do we grow it? Because there's a market for it. I mean, it is in demand, and it's been as high priced the last few years as anything that we could grow. And part of that is to feed the dairy industry. The dairy industry was one of the only sectors of the ag group that was actually growing. Even though our total acreage in the state has been shrinking, the dairy area has been growing in total cow numbers. And so, you know, they're paying big prices for alfalfa hay. And the only reason alfalfa uses as much water as it does is because it occupies the field every day of the year. It's a 3-year crop. And so it's out there having evapotranspiration going on every day. And so how much water do you lose off of a swimming pool? It's about 6 feet a year. It's about 72 inches. Well, that's about what an alfalfa field will, the evapotranspiration rate off of that field is about the same as it is off of your pool. That's what you use to calculate your ET, is you use a little pan evaporation model, and you'll have a factor that you'll apply to it, depending on whether the wind's blowing or not, or you know, just what's going on. But that's the relationship, and that's why it doesn't make any difference whether it's a swimming pool or a golf course or an acre of alfalfa. It's going to be, the evapotranspiration rate is going to be roughly the same. But having said that, you know, we're farming in California now, and one of the things that I find, the differences are just amazing. Because one thing, we're planting grapes over there right now, and you automatically, you put in a drip system when you plant the crop. There's no question that's what you do. Because, one, it saves, you know, application, labor and all these other things, and it's good placement of water, but it's the practice that gives you the most yield for what you're doing. And there's no question that would be the case here. You know, we do have a significant number of acres. I know one farm way out on the west side, 5,000 acres, it's all in berry drip. There's some more down toward Maricopa that are berry drip. But it's a lot harder to work your traditional rotational systems with the berry drip system. All of the open ground that I own in California has berry drip on it. And what do they grow? Processing tomatoes, fresh market tomatoes, garlic, onions. They do rotate into cotton, Pima cotton. They just split the tomato bed and grow 2 rows of cotton as a rotation, because it's important to do that. You get benefits from rotating those crops. And also in water cost. I mean, we'll pay $107 an acre foot in California. No big deal. Why? You know, the evapotranspiration rate in the Central Valley is roughly half what it is here. Just the ambient humidity is enough higher that, you know, for any given crop, if you compare it here over to there, it's about half the ET is. And so, you know, it's much easier to put in a system over there, and especially if you have higher valued crops. And when you start looking here, well, we've got 40 acres of pomegranates over there. Can you grow pomegranates here? Oh yeah. What are you gonna do with it? You know, over there, we've got like 3 different juice houses we can take them to. We've got a little packing shed that pack the fresh fruit first. You know, how do you ever wind up establishing something like here, so that like that here? The infrastructure, you know, that's available there is just so, I mean, dramatically different. For our citrus, we can take our citrus to any number of like 8 houses right within a 10-mile radius. So we've got packing capability. The last one in Central Arizona closed down a year or 2 ago, didn't it, Jim? And so that's one of the things that makes it hard to make the transition over to any crops that might be more